Hello everybody, welcome back. The filter is back in effect. Super excited to have this afternoon ready for you. A little vlog check-in here, especially after I finally submitted all of my grades and my comments here at the end of my 18th school year at my current position. It's been great, really exciting. Nothing quite like turning in those grades and comments. It always feels like this totally insurmountable, impossible thing that you have to do. But you do it, and you got through, and here we are, very excited to do that. So I wanted to talk today about a couple of things. It occurred to me, I had a great conversation with Amy Welborn, one of the OG bloggers from the early 2000s. In the Catholic sphere, followed her early on. She's really a fantastic commentator on all things churchy, especially in the Roman Catholic context. If you are interested in getting a little bit of kind of a behind-the-scenes look at what it was like to live and work in a chancery in that very strange and overlooked decade, roughly from the end of the council to the early 80s. We'll call it a long decade. And so much happened of consequence from the time that Paul VI promulgated the new Mass and when John Paul II ascends to the papacy for, I think, one of the most consequential papacies. And my frustration stemmed from the fact that modern day folks who skew conservative or traditional, I think, have gotten it in their heads that John Paul II is some kind of, apostatizing modernist. And I think it's really important that that narrative get addressed. And so I did that a little bit with Amy, and the reason why I do it, I got accused on X from some accounts who are, sort of traditional and fired up about those kinds of things, that, John Paul II kind of ruined the church, etc. And I just think it's a low resolution take that is not worthy. And not because I worship John Paul II and I believe that John Paul II did no bad things. I mean, he's a human being. He certainly made some juridical decisions or how he governed the church. I certainly have some problems with the way that he handled it, but I do think that the context of the post-conciliar period is an important one to figure in. So anyway, did a little bit of that, and it occurred to me that people underrate what was happening to the church in the aftermath of the council, in the aftermath of the promulgation of the new Mass, and how much John Paul II stood athwart of those modernizing tendencies. We really wouldn't have a church in quite the same way at all if not for his consequential papacy. And so, but he's an historical figure. And what it occurred to me that in order for us to chart our way out of the mess as a church, I do think it's important to have honest conversations about the council and honest conversations about what has happened to the church in the second half of the 20th century, and now 25 years into the 21st century. And I fixate upon this because it's important not to have a kind of low resolution analysis, because a low resolution analysis is going to run the risk of giving you a faulty sense about where we have to go, because it gives you a faulty sense of where we have been. And people are surprised in the comments. Like, well, why are you doing this? And it's like, well, the church was going through, what I consider a kind of revolution, and the forces that had the upper hand in the aftermath of the council really were trying to do an end around of Paul VI. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Paul VI, but he himself talks about the smoke of Satan entering into the cracks of the church, and people in Acts are like, yeah, the smoke of Satan, that he himself lit the match for, and all those kinds of things, and haha, I get it. To a certain extent, there's something to that, but really, if you look in the immediate aftermath of the council, the modernizing forces, the modernist forces, were ready, set, go. They put out what they called the new catechism, and in that so-called new catechism, they were just putting sticks of dynamite to the foundations of the magisterium, the foundations of the church practices. And for this modern world, the church had to get modern and had to get rid of all of its sort of the vestiges of monarchy and the vestiges of the ancient world. And so everything was done in this kind of spirit, this kind of quote-unquote democratic spirit, and everything was up for grabs. Later this week, I'm actually recording a show with my mother. Judy will be on. Hopefully, I'll be putting that out at the end of this week. And she is going to give us a kind of a view of what it was like to be a freshman in college, freshman or a sophomore in college, when the Second Vatican Council began. And she was a senior in college when the Second Vatican Council was brought to a close. And she has some really interesting insights of what it was like to be there. Now, she herself is a daily communicant. She is a extremely devout and pious woman. She raised 3 Catholic boys who are now Catholic men. All of us practice our faith, and but she has got some interesting insights into those matters, and what it was like to sort of be optimistic as a young Catholic in the early and mid '60s, especially in the aftermath of the first Catholic president, John F. Kennedy, and all those kinds of things. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you in the coming days. But when I was in school, I had essentially no catechism. I mean, I had some amount of catechism on the home front because my mom was a practicing Catholic and she was serious about it. But she, she will describe what it was like to sort of feel like everything was up for grabs. And I'll let her tell her story in a little bit. But the important part for everybody to understand about John Paul II, when he was elected in 1978 after the month-long papacy of John Paul I, he was seen as a kind of retrograde, backwardist, indiatrist force that was stopping the council from realizing its full potential. And so, anyway, we'll talk about what he represented and why he was so vital. But today I was in the middle of finishing up my grades. That's when I have all my good ideas, oddly enough. And of course, I tend to post on X these little thoughts to kind of get them off of my head. And so I was doing that today, and it occurred to me that we lived through, and we are living through, especially in the last 12 years, what I call critical church theory. And the reason why I call it critical church theory is that it behaves, those forces, those progressive forces in the church behave very much like what we saw in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years with critical race theory and CRT and the Black Lives Matter movement and all of that. And it is a incredibly pernicious force. It's essentially, again, it functions like a kind of Marxist critique of power and class. But of course, you have to make certain translations into sort of theology speak or church speak. And that is and was a powerful counter force that saw the council as their real opportunity to remake the church in its own image, much in the same way that critical race theory functions as a way of cannibalizing existing structures, educational structures, and governmental structures and societal structures, to bring about a kind of year zero. And so for those forces, year zero, maybe it's 1965, maybe year zero is 1970 when the new Mass is promulgated. Actually, it's Advent of 69, but you get the basic idea. And so much of the idiom of that version of the church is inflected with what we know now as kind of critical race theory. And so it is an ideology that plays fast and loose with the facts. Its relationship to tradition is kind of a cartoon version of tradition. It sees tradition as the enemy. And of course, you might be saying, well, how can you have a church that's based upon 2,000 years of history? How can you just kind of get it? Well, they did. That's what they tried to do. And so when you're dealing with critical church theory, you have to remember that words almost always mean the opposite, right? So dialogue doesn't mean dialogue. Dialogue means shut up and listen. Inclusion means exclusion. So a perfect example of this is quite famously Pope Francis, somewhat later in his pontificate, said sort of the three-word mantra, totus, totus, totus. All are welcome, all are welcome, all are welcome. And of course, if you found yourself on maybe a different side of church politics, you realize that totus, totus, totus did not mean me. It did not mean everyone. It meant the kind of people that they want. And so what we see here, I think critical church theory has manifested itself in spectacular fashion with Bishop Martin in Charlotte, with his leaked and apparently shelved letter dictating to the faithful of the Charlotte diocese how they are to worship in a kind of radically honest and radically disruptive way. The joke that I heard from someone is that in the before times the church was very clear in governing what the priest could and could not do during the Mass, and largely left the laity alone. But in our sort of this new version of church, this sort of critical church theory, you see that the priests can kind of do whatever they want now. Of course, I'm being somewhat bombastic here, but the priests can kind of do whatever they want, and it's the people that cannot kneel to receive Holy Communion. That the women are not allowed to veil if they are electors, and all of these sort of crazy things. I really recommend reading that shelved letter that was put out by, I think, Rorate Caeli. It's a traditional website. I'll put a link on the bottom of the show notes here so that you can kind of read the letter. But the letter, for me, it was like this strange moment of whiplash. I felt like I was in religion class in the mid and late 80s in late grade school and high school, in which the sneering contempt for everything before the council was in full flower and full bloom. And fortunately for us, the church finally decides, against its wishes in an interesting sort of way, to go ahead and put out and publish a catechism, the new catechism of the Catholic Church. And that was met with howls of contempt and derision by the professional theological and educational establishment in church circles. That they wanted to hold on to these. They wanted to hold on to the mysteries of theology, so that they could basically tell the laity what they wanted to tell the laity. And when the church publishes this catechism, I think it's maybe in 89, 91, something like that. I'll get that later on. Sorry, I'm recording on my car filter, so I can't look it up right now. But what that did was put a stop to a lot of the foolishness, because a motivated and faithful minded layperson could simply say, well, what you are saying, teacher, what you are saying, DRE, Director of Religious Education at the parish, what you are saying, Father so-and-so, and oftentimes Sister so-and-so, a non-habited Sister so-and-so, what you're saying actually contradicts the Catholic catechism. And so it was a hugely monumental moment that gets underappreciated, I think. So anyway, one of the pushback, some of the pushback that I got was from people on X, was that that John Paul II and Benedict XVI are really modernists, and they were not trads and all those sorts of things. And of course, I've never claimed that either of them were trads as such, or the way that we understand that phrase in 2025. But in 1985, let's say, the trads were a microscopic, small group of holdouts. And there was no social media. There was no major magazine that was pushing these kinds of things. It was a truly marginalized group. But what Benedict XVI, as John Paul II's head of the doctrine, they built out a group of faithful Catholics who were ready to push back. And so in the middle years of the Francis papacy, what you see is a huge pushback against what Francis was doing or not doing. It was always so ambiguous. But that pushback was done by folks that had kind of grown up in the second half, come into themselves as adults in the second half of John Paul II's papacy. And World Youth Day in Denver was a huge moment. It gets kind of memory hold because the trads like to make fun of huge outdoor masses, and I don't particularly like them either. But a lot of these folks had kind of come back into the church with like the likes of Scott Hahn, the famous Protestant minister who converts to Catholicism, and his influence is also just hugely important, which is why you saw a lot of the Francis fans really going hard after Scott Hahn, calling him a heretic and a schismatic and all these kinds of things, which, again, only if you grew up in the church prior to Scott Hahn would you understand that what they were saying about Scott Hahn was disgusting and gross. And folks like me, I don't think that I would be Catholic if it weren't for the kind of robust and generative apologetics that Scott Hahn offered in the early 90s. Hugely, hugely important. I remember reading this. I didn't read it. It was on cassette. It was his course, and I think it was called Romanism in Paul's Letter to the Romans. And it was like on 8 cassette tapes. And I was that's the kind of kid I was, right? But it was just hugely influential for me to see the way in which this powerful apologetics afforded a justification and rendered a profound account of what it could mean to be Catholic in the era of the 90s. So that's something that also gets a bit memory hold. And so what I do find fascinating, though, as I sort of step back a moment, is that immediately upon the passing of Pope Francis, you have this period of time, and I was really surprised to see how much John Paul II got reinserted into the conversation. And that there was an attempt, I think, to hijack his memory. And you can be critical of St. John Paul II, but to rewrite the history so radically, I thought was not fair to his legacy, nor to the legacy of Benedict XVI. But when I think about Benedict XVI, one of the most important things that I think he did during his papacy was Summorum Pontificum, which sort of gave full right to say the extraordinary form. And his hope in promulgating that motu proprio was that the old rite and the new rite could have a kind of generous influence upon one another. And I think the real reason for Traditionis Custodes, Pope Francis's rule, making the Latin Mass illegal, essentially, again. I think it was done because Summorum Pontificum was working. I think the taste and the thirst that young people exhibit for a more mysterious, a more vertical liturgy is straight out of the kind of permission structure of Summorum Pontificum. Without that, I think you would not have the kind of pushback that we have seen with the young people, especially, and it's so interesting because the older folks, people, baby boomers, early and late, are just shocked, frankly, that the Latin Mass has any kind of influence, has any kind of, that it can be attractive at all is just a total shock, because it works against the spells that were cast by the directors of the Spirit of Vatican II. And I know this is a little bit of inside baseball, but the revolutionaries worked overtime to make sure that the revolution that they thought they had achieved and the revolution that they thought had survived that darn Polish Pope, they thought that they had kind of won the day. And that's why you have the pushback with Traditionis Custodes. But honestly, I don't think it's going to work. I think that the taste is there for a more mysterious, a more ancient liturgical life. And these forms of piety have a kind of lindy quality to them that we are seeing. So, the forces of critical church theory, I'm going to have to work this out a little bit more on paper, but the forces of critical church theory are not going to go away, but I don't think that they have any children, as I told Amy. So I guess that's all I got today. I just wanted to do a vlog. I'm really excited for this summer. I'm going to be doing finally my course on Frankenstein and AI. I'm really excited about that. Not that I'm excited about AI. I think AI is all but impending doom, if I'm being honest with you right now. But that's something that's been really charging my imagination. And one of the things, I feel like every school year something kind of rises up that needs to be radically addressed. And clearly what needs to be addressed is what AI is doing to us, especially we teachers, and more importantly, the thing that I care most about is what it is doing to our students. What it is doing to our students is kind of transhumanist in its bent. It is bending the knee, forfeiting our very humanity to the sort of the hyper-functionality, at least alleged hyper-functionality of AI and perhaps AGI. So I'll have a lot to say about that in the coming weeks and I hope to weave that into this course that I've been plotting for quite a long time on Frankenstein. That this is not going away. I think there's a real propensity for folks to sort of wish it weren't coming, and so you see a lot of, I have experienced a decent amount of posturing by some people saying something to the effect of, oh, it's a nothing burger, it's not going to be bad. I don't think that's the case. I think it's going to be way more than a nothing burger, and therefore questions of our humanity, questions that were predicted by thinkers like C.S. Lewis in Abolition of Man and in That Hideous Strength, are coming to the fore in incredible ways. We have been given a vision of this, and we are no longer dealing with, as I said last time, no longer that hideous strength, but this hideous strength. And this hideous strength is going to join forces with the demythologizers and the debunkers, as C.S. Lewis would call them. And they are going to create men without chests. And that's what I see in my students. These are good kids. I don't mean, they're not nefarious or anything like that, but the ambient forces, the world in which they are living in, they no longer see the benefit of learning how to read. For them, it's all just about data, and so it's not just about using AI to generate papers. That's obvious, but way more important is the outsourcing of reading, the outsourcing of thinking, the outsourcing of writing to something that does a better job than you. And this exposes, I think, something that we in the educational space have allowed to happen, and we need to push back against this, and we need to push back against this real hard, because if you do not do the work yourself, you do not get built out as a human being. You become, in Lewis's coinage, you become gelding, and we should then not be surprised if those geldings that we have fashioned failed to produce, which brings me to another topic that I've been thinking a lot about lately, which is the so-called demographic crisis that nobody seems to really be paying attention. Ross Douthat, in his great podcast called Interesting Times, had on a social scientist from England. I forget her name, maybe Dr. Evans. I'll put that in the show notes as well. They had an incredible conversation just talking about what is happening and the failure to do the most seemingly obvious thing, which is to couple and to generate. And it appears that we are electing to not couple. We collectively here, we are electing to not couple, and we are electing to not generate. And if you can't see the malignant hand of dark spirits working against God's great commands to be fruitful and multiply, then, to quote Jonathan Pageau, I don't know what to tell you. So there's a kind of interesting nexus between these two. Now, the accelerationists believe, I think foolishly, but they believe that we are going to find some sort of tech solution through this crisis. I am not an optimist when it comes to these matters. I think that there is no tech solution. You can't find public policy measures that's going to make people have babies. And I believe that the only solution is a metaphysical one. We have babies, and we build societies, and we build communities, and we build these things because we have a divine mandate to do so. But in order to live out that divine mandate, we have to be enculturated into that mandate. So if you look at the book of Genesis, for instance, you can see that the God of the Bible is certainly the God of Genesis, thus generation, Genesis, gens. That God is positively obsessed with babies and making babies, and his the work of salvation history is the work of that seemingly obvious thing, which is to generate and to make babies. And so we're not doing that. And while I admire these initiatives to sort of cajole people into coupling and having kids, I don't think tax breaks are going to be our ticket out of this problem. Our problem is ultimately a metaphysical one. And remember, the metaphysical infuses and inspires, inspirits the physical. And so I'm not surprised that we as a culture who are suffering through a meaning crisis, I'm not surprised in the least bit that we are choosing, consciously or unconsciously, not to have children. And look, let's be honest. Having children in today's world, certainly in the United States of America, North America, and I'm sure Europe, it's a tough thing. It's expensive. There are all kinds of pressures. All of us feel like we are one small decision from rendering a tragedy and a disaster with our children. And so everybody's rushing to high land, or what they think is high land, because they can kind of sense that this tsunami is coming. But we don't quite have it right. And I think as we are growing these AIs, remember, we don't really build an AI, you kind of grow an AI. As we are growing these AIs, I think they're exposing the deep, deep sickness of modernity. I don't really believe in post-modernity. I think post-modernity is just another phase of modernity. Maybe that's for another time too. But we have to get into more profound, more embodied sensibilities of knowing, of living and moving and having our being, and absent the metaphysical. None of that makes sense. We've been living off the fumes of pre-modernity for a really long time, and we're going to have to somehow get after it. And I use that phrase on purpose, to somehow get. And you can't go backwards. You have to go forwards. But you have to go forward with some things that have been jettisoned. Those things that were treated as flotsam and jetsam have to be retrieved and reinserted into our social imaginary. That great phrase from Charles Murray. I'll also be doing a little work with Murray again. Charles Taylor. I'm also going to be doing a little work with Charles Taylor, especially in his work on the social imaginary, and as a way of understanding the culture of the church, and ultimately, I guess, a way to understand the culture of things. So if you like my stuff, please hit the like and subscribe button. It's very helpful. You can subscribe to my Substack. I've got a bunch of great things planned upcoming here on the Substack as well. So, Memorial Day has come and gone. We are now in the summer. I've got a couple of faculty meetings, and then I'm good to go. I'll be going to Oxford at the end of July. My younger brother is being ordained a priest in a couple of weeks. I'm super excited for Josh. I hope to have him on the channel here to discuss what it feels like, what it means to be a priest in the year of our Lord 2025. It's going to be super exciting, and you'll like him. He's super smart, super sharp, and on fire for the Lord. I'm so proud of him. So, all right, until next time, we will see you later.